What kind of weapon makes the enemy decide that taking you alive is simply an option? In World War II, the men who carried flamethrowers had an average battlefield lifespan of 4 minutes. They were not just targeted, they were executed on sight, denied surrender by an unspoken rule that placed them outside every code of combat. And the reasons go far deeper than fear. On the black sands of Iwo Jima, a Marine with a flamethrower became the first and last target for every enemy rifle. The numbers alone tell the story. A flamethrower operator in World War II could expect to survive just 4 minutes after entering combat. For Herschel Woody Williams, the odds were even worse. His Medal of Honor action began after every other member of his 6-man flamethrower team had been killed or wounded. Williams advanced alone, carrying 70 pounds of pressurized fuel toward Japanese pillboxes that had stopped an entire battalion cold. Survival rates for flame teams on Iwo Jima barely reached 5%. The men who carried these weapons were not just vulnerable, they were marked for death by an unspoken rule. Enemy soldiers, whether Japanese or German, almost never took a flamethrower operator prisoner. Surrender was denied, capture meant execution. Williams' story is not one of glory, but of isolation and calculated sacrifice, raising a question that haunted every man who strapped on the tank. Why did the very weapon they carried make them untouchable by the laws of war? The sight of a flamethrower in action triggered something primal on the battlefield. A single burst sent a jet of fire arching 40 yards, rolling in thick, living waves that swallowed bunkers whole. For the men facing it, there was no ambiguity. No one wanted to be on the receiving end, and no one wanted to be near the man carrying it. Soldiers who saw the flame described a terror that went beyond bullets or shells. The weapon's roar, the blinding orange plume, and the stench of burning fuel created a spectacle that erased any notion of ordinary combat. In enemy diaries and post-war interrogations, flamethrower operators were called monsters, fire demons, and the living nightmare. The fear they inspired was so absolute that surrender became unthinkable, not just for the operator, but for those who might try to capture him. In the chaos of an assault, enemy troops didn't hesitate. They shot at the tanks first, aiming to ignite the fuel and turn the operator into a human torch. If a flamethrower operator fell wounded, the attack didn't stop. Riflemen rushed forward to finish him before he could be taken alive. The weapon's horror eclipsed any code of mercy, stripping away the thin protection offered by the laws of war. In this climate, the decision to execute a surrendering flamethrower operator was not debated. It was a reflex, shaped by fear, and the belief that anyone who wielded fire had stepped outside the boundaries of humanity itself. Strapping on the 68-pound tank was like accepting a private sentence. Herschel Woody Williams described the feeling as a mix of dread and duty. The harness digging into his shoulders as he crawled toward pillboxes that had already claimed his friends. The flamethrower's fuel sloshed with every breath, a constant reminder that a single bullet could turn him into a human torch. Each burst lasted only seconds, 8, maybe 10. But those moments stretched into a lifetime, the roar of burning fuel drowning out every other sound. Williams later spoke of the silence that followed, a silence filled with the memory of what he had done and what he had survived. The physical weight was only part of the burden. Operators like Williams carried a moral load that no training manual addressed. Long after the war, he recalled the faces of men who never had the chance to surrender, the knowledge that his weapon erased the line between soldier and executioner. The guilt lingered for decades, surfacing in quiet moments and sleepless nights. For many, the scars ran deeper than burns, the true cost of wielding a weapon that made mercy impossible, and survival itself a kind of exile. On Iwo Jima, volcanic ash swallowed boots and stalled tanks, while Guadalcanal's jungle masked a maze of caves and pillboxes. Japanese General Tadamichi Kuribayashi masterminded Iwo Jima's defenses, ordering his men to dig deep and connect bunkers with tunnels invisible to bombers and nearly immune to artillery. Rifle fire and tank shells bounced off concrete walls 2 feet thick. Campaign maps from the era reveal a labyrinth where every advance meant crawling toward hidden explosives or sudden ambush. Conventional tactics broke down. Reports from both islands describe battalions pinned by interlocking bunkers, progress measured in feet, not miles. The flamethrower, once controversial, became the only tool that could clear defenders from these underground strongholds. Commanders accepted heavy losses among flame teams because nothing else worked. The terrain dictated the fight, forcing armies to send men into killing grounds. Every operator understood the odds, but without them, the islands would never fall. The logic was as unforgiving as the landscape, leaving little space for mercy. Instruction for flamethrower crews was measured in hours, not weeks. The Marine Corps' one-day flamethrower school offered just 4 hours of theory, 2 hours of loading practice, and 1 hour on the firing range. Manuals skipped over what to do when the weapon failed in battle, leaving men to improvise under fire. The M1A1 and M22 models they carried were notorious for fuel leaks, pressure loss, and ignition failures. After-action reports from Bougainville and New Georgia record that 12% of malfunctions came from faulty igniters. At the worst possible moment, the spark would die, and the operator would be stranded, exposed, and defenseless. Depot records show that 3% of tanks failed pressure tests within 3 months, often rupturing in the field. Not every retrofit reached the front lines. Some crews received reinforced tanks and new ignition cartridges, but many did not. The lack of emergency drills meant that when a gun jammed or fuel spilled, survival depended on luck. In the chaos of combat, a stuck valve or a dead battery could turn a Marine into a sitting target, fueling the grim statistics of capture and execution that haunted every flamethrower platoon. By 1944, the United States Chemical Warfare Service launched a campaign to rebrand the flamethrower as a weapon of mercy. Pamphlets and training films circulated among troops and the public, repeating the phrase instant and painless, a calculated reassurance that death by fire was swift, almost humane. The official line went further, dubbing the weapon a mercy killer and insisting that its victims felt nothing. The message filtered down through every level of command, dulling the edge of moral hesitation. For a Marine ordered to fire or a commander sending flame teams forward, the idea that flame meant quick oblivion made the act easier to justify, especially as casualty lists grew longer and the horror of the weapon became harder to ignore. But the science told a different story. Post-war medical studies revealed that flamethrower burns inflicted agony beyond imagination. Doctors found that victims suffered not just external burns, but catastrophic airway damage. Lungs were scorched by superheated air, and breathing passages were sealed by swelling and soot. Death, when it came, was rarely instant and never painless. The Chemical Warfare Service narrative, meant to shield soldiers from guilt, instead stripped away the last barrier to killing. On the battlefield, the propaganda's promise of mercy left flamethrower operators and their enemies caught in a cycle of dehumanization, where execution became routine and empathy was written out of the manual. The lie lingered long after the flames died, leaving questions that no pamphlet could answer. No international treaty ever named the flamethrower as an illegal weapon. The 1907 Hague Convention, which set out rules for land warfare, banned poison and chemical agents but left incendiary weapons untouched. This omission created a legal vacuum, one that both Axis and Allied commanders exploited. Military manuals from the era included no guidance for the treatment of flamethrower operators as prisoners of war. Instead, the decision to execute a captured flamethrower operator was left to the field, justified as a matter of tactical necessity rather than a breach of law. After the war, no tribunal singled out the murder of flamethrower crews as a separate crime. The United States continued to issue flamethrowers to its troops through Korea and Vietnam. Only in 1978, after congressional hearings and mounting ethical concerns, did the United States military formally abandon the weapon. By then, the damage was done. The absence of legal protection meant that the fate of flamethrower operators was decided not by courts or conventions, but by fear and expedience on the battlefield. The question of moral accountability remained unanswered, hanging over every decision to pull the trigger or deny surrender. Justice rarely reached the men who executed flamethrower operators in wartime. Tribunal records from Nuremberg and Yokohama list countless war crimes, but not a single case names the murder of a captured flamethrower operator as a separate offense. The violence that consumed these operators was simply absorbed into the chaos of battle, erased from the legal record, and soon after, from public memory. Herschel Woody Williams spent his later years trying to correct that silence. Through the Woody Williams Foundation, he campaigned for memorials to Gold Star families and the overlooked demolition teams who paid the highest price. His speeches, delivered at dedications across the country, rarely dwelled on his own medals. Instead, he recited the names of those lost, insisting that their sacrifice not be forgotten. Academic studies of veteran memorials confirm what Williams understood. Without deliberate remembrance, the stories of these men vanish. The absence of prosecutions was not just a legal failure. It was a cultural erasure, leaving the firebearers with no place in the official story of war. The law still draws no clear line around weapons that erase mercy itself. The no prisoner rule for flamethrower men lingers as a stark reminder. Some choices in war leave wounds that rules cannot heal. The reckoning for these decisions is not history, it is the world we inherit now.